Year after year, traveling during summer in certain places around the world is getting more and more chaotic. With air traffic levels already reaching pre-pandemic numbers, last summer has proven to be a challenge in places such as Europe and the United States. Short-staffed airlines, heavy air traffic, and lack of ATC personnel all contributed to many big hubs being a mess with delays and cancellations. Last summer, I had the chance to travel through two of the most affected airports, Newark Liberty International and New York LaGuardia. While fortunately I was not affected by any delay or cancellation, both airports as well as many others were having a hard time keeping their operations as scheduled. With this experience under my belt and seeing how crowded the airports were at that time due to the high demand, which adds up to the other problems I mentioned earlier on, I decided to make this video giving you guys some tips for you to have in mind for your next summer travels. Tip number 1. Go to the airport with time. Not only should you bear in mind the time needed at the airport, but also the time needed to get to the airport. Usually, when demand is so high, traffic on the way to the airport is heavy. For this reason, try to calculate your journey's time with a margin. At the end of the day, there's no need to be stressing out on the highways when you could have left some minutes in advance without affecting your plans for the day. Tip number 2. Arrive to the airport early enough. Usually, people say that you must be at the airport 3 hours before your international flight or 2 hours before a domestic flight. Each traveler has their own opinion about this, and every person manages their time differently. During summer peak season though, my tip for you is that you go to the airport with extra time. You don't know how many people you're going to find on the check-in lines, at security, or at the passport control. So instead of going 2 or 3 hours in advance, make sure you arrive 4 hours early. At the end of the day, in most cases, this won't change any of your plans for the day and will give you an extra sense of calmness at the airport. Also, if you're lucky enough and manage to get everything done in a breeze, you can spend your time at the airport. Usually, airports affected by summer travels are the biggest ones, so you'll have a lot of shops and dining options there, as well as seating possibilities and places to work at. Better chilling out airside than being stuck at security 5 minutes before your flight boards. Tip number 3. Be aware of the status of your flight. Of course, there's nothing you can do if your flight happens to be delayed or cancelled. However, there's something you can do, which is to keep track of your flight. You can do this by taking a look at the departure screen at the airport every couple of minutes, or by downloading the airline's app or another app which gives you flight updates. You might be asking yourselves, what for? Well, this way, if your flight happens to suffer a delay or cancellation, you will be aware of that as soon as you possibly can, which will give you the chance to go to the airline's customer service and try to get your flight changed. This is very important, especially if you have tight connections, which is part of the following tip. Tip number 4. Avoid tight connections. If you're traveling during summer, you might want to avoid tight connections, especially if your itinerary includes traveling through big airports. Not only could you be affected by delayed or cancelled flights, it might also happen that your flight departs on time, so far so good, until you arrive at your destination, where there are no gates available, for example. Something stupid like this might cause you to lose your connection if things are sufficiently bad that day. So, my tip is that you leave at least 2 hours for domestic connections and 3 for international connections. This way, you should be covered for eventual problems like ramp delays. Then if the flight is delayed or cancelled, well, that's something you've got absolutely no control of, but at least you did everything you had in your control to avoid losing your connection. Tip number 5. Don't be afraid to claim what belongs to you. It might happen that, in some cases, your flight ends up being delayed or cancelled to a certain extent that your itinerary is affected. In case you find yourself in a situation like this, you must be aware of certain things. Firstly, there are some laws and regulations, depending on the country you are flying to or from, that force the airline to pay a fine to their passengers after a number of hours of delay or a cancelled flight. Most of the times, passengers are not aware of this, so they don't claim. Of course, they don't get anything either. Why would the airline pay them out if they are not even aware of that? However, if you do your research and make a claim, there should be no reason why the airline wouldn't pay you. It's better if you can do this at the airport so that you don't have to wait on the phone or fight with their customer service via email. Also, once you're back home, you can also email their customer service telling them how bad your experience with the airline was. In some cases, they might give you some extra miles or even a voucher, so if I was you, I would give it a try. If you don't try, you'll never know. Tip number 6. Stay calm. One last tip before I wrap up this video is to stay calm. Sure, these things are stressful, but panicking will not take you further. At the end of the day, these are things that are out of your control, so the best thing you can do is to stay calm. At the same time, staying cold-blooded will let you manage the situation better and eventually get better solutions from the airline staff. The better you treat them, the better they will treat you, and they'll make their best effort to sort your situation out. It's also a great exercise to stay composed. So, this being it for today's video, I really hope you find it useful. I know it is still winter, but summer will come, and unfortunately, chaos is very likely to happen. So, keep all these tips in mind, and hopefully, you will be able to handle these stressful situations better. Anyway, thank you very much for watching until the end. This is the last extra video from my 2022 United States trip. Next week, I'll publish a terminal tour, and that will be the last video of this trip. However, in a few weeks' time I'll be traveling again, so it won't be long until I have new content to share with you guys, which I tell you will be very interesting. Appreciate your support very much, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next week for the last one of this trip. Until the next one,